All right, back of another top 10 list. We're going tight ends this time. So top 10 tight ends. I don't need to have some long intro. Let's just get into it. Number 10, the Cleveland Browns tight end, David Njoku, who was a guy who was very hyped up coming out of college, but didn't quite live up to the hype right away. It took him some time to fully become the guy I feel like we thought he could be, but he has become that guy now. He belongs on this list, in my opinion. So, while he's still just number 10, I want to see it for a bit longer before I can put him higher on the list. It is cool to see him kind of finally live up to his potential. So, yeah, I'm going with number 10, David Njoku. Number 9, the former Dallas Cowboy at this point, the now Houston Texan. I was surprised he didn't get more money in free agency, as Dalton Schultz was a very good player and really a complete tight end, I thought, for the Dallas Cowboys for the past couple years now. I think he's been a very underrated player, and for the Texans to kind of get him on a buy low situation, I think he could be really good for them, and I think he has been very good for the Cowboys. So, while yes, maybe he didn't get the contract that being the ninth best tight end would indicate, it's my list, it's who I think are the best, and I think he's very good, so I'm putting him at number 9. Number 8, where is number 8 for the Atlanta Falcons? Kyle Pitts, who was a tough guy to put on this list. Now, it's weird where expectations hurt Kyle Pitts in a big way. The fact that he was drafted 4th overall massively hurt him, and I think that if he was drafted in the 3rd round and he was playing this well, I think people would be thrilled with what he's done and talking about him as maybe people would say he's underrated at number 8 due to expectations. I think that he's been very good, and last year it didn't have the stats, and one thing that hurts Pitts is just the fantasy football of it all. He hasn't been a great fantasy football player, and so because of that, people are upset in that regard. But at the end of the day, I'm evaluating based on how good you are at just football, not fantasy football. And I think that last year, I thought he was still fine last year. I didn't think he had that much issues. I think it was just the situation around him changed, and that's why he wasn't able to be as dominant as we saw him in his rookie year, where he became the 2nd tight end ever to get over 1,000 yards as a rookie. So because of that, I still think Kyle Pitts is very good. There's 7 guys I like better, but I still have him on this list. Number 7, Darren Waller, who now has some injuries and isn't getting any younger, but at the same time, when he's out there, he can be one of the more uncoverable players in this league. Definitely one of those guys that's hard to, you talk about, if you have someone who's fast enough to cover him, usually they're not big enough to cover him. And if someone's big enough to cover him, usually they're not fast enough to cover him. Makes him a mismatch nightmare. Another guy, though, that kind of got given up on a little bit. He's actually the highest paid tight end in the league right now, which is part of why the Raiders, took very little compensation to get rid of him. But still, despite being the highest paid tight end in the league, the Giants were willing to give up some draft capital to go out and get him. And I think he could be a massive threat for them and something they desperately need. So, again, I think that we all know, not a blocker. That's not what he does. That is part of why he's, a little bit older, has some injuries, not a blocker. That's why he falls a little bit on this list, but he's still very good. I have him at 7. Number 6, give me the former Lion, now Minnesota Viking. Interesting how many of these players, have changed teams in the past calendar year. In fact, out of the 5 that I have mentioned, only David Njoku and Kyle Pitts are still on their former teams that they were just a year ago, let alone, that they were drafted, which is also true for those 2 guys. Hockenson, I still don't get why the Lions traded him. It was a 2nd-round pick, so it's not like they got no value from him, but I still feel like that was a weird move. When you have good young players that are in positions of need, like tight ends, who I have as the 6th best tight end, why move off of that? That didn't make sense to me, but I love the idea from the Vikings to get him and try to use him as that 3rd option. Now, I didn't think Thielen really was a great number 2 option down the stretch last year, and so because of that, I think that we didn't really get to see him have maximized value with Minnesota. Definitely someone who will have his ups and downs, but that's also kind of just tight ends in general, with the exception of a few who we'll get to. Most tight ends have their ups and downs. So as a whole, definitely someone who I like a lot. I'm going to have him at number 6. Number 5, I don't know, maybe this is a hot take. I don't think it should be necessarily. Pat Freiermuth of the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think has been awesome for them. And talk about a complete tight end. He is someone who has, I think, really been great at all aspects of the game. And it's kind of why, in some ways, every now and then you have this happen where someone like Pat Freiermuth, we pretty much all knew was going to be good. Everyone who was evaluating tight ends said, like, oh yeah, he's the best tight end. He's really good. Draft him in the second round. And it's kind of like, I don't know, maybe if there's someone like this, you could draft him a little bit earlier. Maybe if there's someone who we all feel like is going to be good, maybe just draft that good player. I'm not saying you always draft a tight end as early as you can, because obviously that's not the case, but probably got slept on a little bit in the draft in hindsight. And the Steelers are always so good at finding the guys who are getting slept on and just saying, no, we're going to take that guy, thank you very much, and he's been great for him. Number 4, give me Dallas Goedert, a guy who still probably at this point, the thing he's best known for was when he got drafted. And you had that incredible speech by, I'm blanking on the former Philadelphia Eagles player's name, who was trolling the Dallas Cowboys. That was definitely very fun. But he's underrated, a very good tight end as well. Another guy who can do it all, but definitely you trust him in the receiving game to make some big plays. And so for Philadelphia, I think he was a big impact player for them. He really was, and kind of real underrated piece of them getting to a Super Bowl. So to me, there's a clear top 3 when it comes to these tight ends. But out of the guys who are not the clear top 3, I decided to put Dallas Goedert as my favorite of those. Number 3, I have George Kittle. Also, David Akers was the name of the guy I was thinking of, just a second ago. Yeah, my bad on that. How could I forget David Akers' name? But yeah, George Kittle, someone who, last year, I'll talk about that when I get to number 2 a little bit more. But last year, I put him at number 3, below my number 2 guy. That got some criticism, although I think now people kind of agree with it. But George Kittle being at number 3, he's one of the 3 elite tight ends in the league. Again, debatably the best blocking tight end in football, so the fact that he's also an elite receiving threat is great. Feels like the 49ers just don't use him in a way that gets him a ton of yards at this point. It's almost like an intentional decision to not have him get an abundance of receiving yards, but it feels like he totally could. There is no knock on George Kittle's game whatsoever. The only knock I have on him is he's not my number 1 and 2 guy. Number 2, Mark Andrews, another incredible all-around tight end. But Mark Andrews really has been the number 1 receiver for the Ravens for quite some time now. I mean, so much of the Ravens offense has been just hope Mark Andrews gets open and throw him the football, because they haven't had too many other receiving threats. Last year, I mentioned this earlier, I gave him my number 2 tight end in the league honors, and that got some criticism. People did not think I should have had him above Kittle. Feels like now that's becoming a much more common take. I was looking at some other top 10 lists, just making sure I didn't forget anyone, because I made these videos in the past. Every now and then I forget someone, and someone will say, "Why didn't you have this guy in the list?" I'm like, "Oh, I just forgot that they existed." So I always try to make sure I look at a bunch of lists just to check that. And a lot of people also had Andrews at number 2, which was a little surprising to me, but I think it makes sense. I mean, again, last year he was better than Kittle in pretty much every single statistical category. And this year, I think that if anything, Kittle's maybe closed that gap a little bit between them two. I think you could argue either one, but I would take Andrews over Kittle today, in my opinion. But number 1 is obvious. It's got to be Travis Kelce. He's the best tight end in football. I mean, what Travis Kelce does, you see all the best receivers list, just receivers, not tight ends, and he's on all of them, right? Every single the guys in the past 10 years who have this many receiving yards, he's always on those lists, which is crazy to think about that he's done that at the tight end position. Best receiving tight end of all time. I think his blocking's fine. I don't think his blocking's bad. Just why would you have him block when you can instead have him run and catch the football and get a touchdown? So best tight end in the league, maybe best tight end of all time, best one on my list. That's what I think. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.